Baby boomers hold half of this country's wealth, almost $80 trillion. And, to put it bluntly, they're dying.
That means that over the next few decades, an unimaginable amount of money is going to change hands. Economists are calling it the greatest wealth transfer in human history, and the main beneficiaries seem to be millennials.
That's right. After struggling through multiple recessions, skyrocketing home prices, healthcare, student loans, and a freaking pandemic, millennials are finally catching a break. In fact, some economists say it will soon make us the wealthiest generation to have ever lived. Woohoo!
I'd rather not high-five the death of my parents. But beyond that, there are a few reasons why millennials shouldn't start celebrating just yet. In fact, most of us probably won't be inheriting anything at all.
So this is already some interesting points that they're covering. And one of the key things that they're highlighting here is how there's a discrepancy in wealth across age, which is generally going to be true. I would say, at least while I think through it, it makes a lot of sense. If you are entering the workforce in your 20s, you probably don't have a lot of savings. You didn't really work all that much prior, and certainly not at high income jobs. You're going to enter your highest earning years probably in your 30s, maybe 40s, and you're going to be saving for retirement throughout that time, hopefully. And so likely the general and natural progression is you start with no money when you're born. You start to accumulate some money, and the speed of which you accumulate it increases until you hit your peak earning years, and then you start to spend some of your savings down, I think is the classic trajectory that folks go on. And then obviously you'll end up dying at some point, and then that wealth goes and progresses onto maybe your family members or friends, or to a charity, wherever that would go. And so then that kind of gets redistributed out to other folks in society at that point in time. So this is a natural occurrence over time. I think something that they're highlighting is especially for boomers and things like that, especially just due to how large that population is, because it was large compared to the populations leading up to it, but it's also larger than some of the populations that followed. And so they're actually a pretty large proportion of the US population at this point in time. And they're older. So actually a huge portion of wealth sits in their hands now because they've had many years to accumulate it. They've had potentially disproportionate amount of political power in so much as their votes. If every vote is equal, then folks within a particular age range that it's lopsided towards is going to have disproportionate amount of power. And so I think there's been generally some data that shows that boomers were more liberal when they were younger, and then they became more conservative over time, potentially as they accumulated wealth. And so this trend, along with some of our economic policies that increase the value of stocks, et cetera, which folks would have had over a longer period of time, such as them, could benefit from. And so it is naturally going to transition away from them at some point and then into younger generations. But curious to see what they say on the inheritance front here.
Baby boomers were born at a pretty good time economically. Since the 1960s, when they would have begun entering adulthood, median home prices have risen by almost 3,000%, and the stock market by 6,000%. That's contributed to their cohort enjoying an average net worth today of almost $1.8 million.
However, that average is heavily skewed by a small handful of super rich boomers. The median net worth, which tends to be more representative of most Americans, is closer to $200,000. Boomers also still carry debt, with a median burden of almost $29,000. That's even more than the typical millennial owes.
This means that the so-called great wealth transfer is pretty lopsided. One analysis estimates that over 40% of the tens of trillions of dollars that will be inherited over the next 20 years will go to just 1.5% of millennials. And because inheritances under $26 million per couple aren't taxed by the federal government, most of that will be tax-free. Meanwhile, the bottom 50% of households, which holds a disproportionate share of Black and Latino families, will account for only 8% of inherited dollars. This has some economists worrying that this shift will only widen America's already huge socioeconomic gap.
But what about those in the middle? Most boomers might not have $1 million in the bank, but a lot of them are still living in paid-off houses. And the average boomer has about $200,000 in a 401k, which, unlike a pension, can be handed down to their kids. With home prices at record highs, many millennials might be counting on this windfall to finally get into the real estate market themselves.
Unfortunately, surveys show that they might be overestimating how much they're likely to inherit. A majority of millennials reported that they expect to receive about $350,000 from their parents' estate. The majority of parents, however, said they plan to leave less than $250,000. Even that may be too optimistic, because there's another interested party salivating over that $80 trillion of boomer wealth, the healthcare industry.
We all know that medical costs have been soaring over the last couple decades. In addition, the older you are, the higher medical prices tend to be, and boomers are living longer and longer lives. Thanks to falling birth rates, Americans over 65 will soon outnumber those under 18 for the first time in history. Those boomers are retiring in droves from a number of fields, including healthcare, and are not being replaced by younger workers at a fast enough rate.
Yeah, so they start to cover some of the disparities in wealth. One is one of the reasons why they're highlighting inheritance is probably less than what you might be expecting, because so much of wealth is aggregated in a small percentage of the population. Then obviously their inheritance isn't just going to come to all of us. Like Bill Gates isn't just going to hand every US millennial a fraction of his wealth. I think some of them, I believe Bill Gates himself is planning on donating a lot to charity. And so this is where you're likely only going to get a fraction of this from your direct parents. And you probably know if your parents are billionaires or not already. So that means most individuals have parents who are not. I think they even highlighted 200K was the median net worth for boomers in this case. And they use median here because averages skew higher because that's where a good chunk of the values are. So these billionaires are basically skewing the numbers so much that, like, while the median is 200K, the average might have been like 600K or 700K, which is obviously not representative. The median being half of Americans have less than 200K and half have more than 200K. So that helps give folks a better idea of what the average person might be getting. And they're also highlighting this healthcare system, which does generally increase costs for folks who are older. This could be from direct medical services. Also, there's things like nursing homes, etc., or general care for individuals that can be quite expensive as you age. And so actually, there's a much higher draw specifically for that category as you get older. And so as medical innovation improves and we allow folks to live longer, potentially that time frame where they're getting these quite exorbitant prices to maintain their living situation can actually drain what they have in retirement pretty quickly. Also, there's inflation that they haven't quite covered yet, which is hopefully the individuals they're referencing obviously aren't going to die, or most of them aren't going to die like tomorrow. So there's likely going to be years where whatever number you have in mind or they have in mind for their current wealth is one likely going to shrink just from normal living over that time, might even shrink faster due to the healthcare. And the value of that money will likely decrease as well due to inflation. And so that certainly impacts a number of folks. And obviously there's like the actual handling of those individuals, like funeral home costs, maybe the burials, other things that you have, maybe you need to settle other loans, etc., that they might have. And so you're likely going to lose another portion after this individual passes away just to handle processing of all that stuff. Maybe you'll even seek a lawyer or a financial advisor, which can also potentially take another fraction to help coordinate all the complexity that exists there. And then you'll get that portion actually in inheritance. So yeah, I do believe that most folks are overestimating the value of their inheritance from what they've already shared so far.
If proposed policies limiting immigration become law, that could put further strain on the labor pool. And as anyone with a passing knowledge of economics knows, growing demand plus shrinking supply equals higher prices.
What about Medicare, you ask? The baby boomers have been paying into this government insurance program their whole lives with the expectation that it will cover healthcare costs in their old age. That's mostly true, although like most insurance programs, enrollees are asked to pay premiums, deductibles, and copays, all of which are increasing. A 2022 report estimated that the average couple who retires at 65 can expect to pay around $315,000 on medical expenses over the last years of their lives.
And if they end up in a nursing home, that number can be significantly higher. Medicare does not cover residency and long-term care facilities, and these facilities are eye-wateringly expensive. With a median cost of over $9,000 a month, long-term care could easily deplete the average boomer's net worth in just a few short years.
Yeah, so just to recap that quickly, they highlighted some numbers there. So one, they highlighted that most folks have maybe 400K by the time that they actually enter retirement age. And then shortly after highlighted that the average individual spends about 315K in their healthcare costs as they get older in age. So they've already highlighted the fact that basically that 400K immediately gets dropped down to 85K. And that's not necessarily handling it more extreme cases, and also doesn't include that individual's normal spending over those years. So at least from what I've witnessed myself, most folks are splitting maybe 100K, give or take, maybe less, depending on the situation that the individuals are in, which is obviously a big difference if you're trying to think of their current home value. Also for the nursing home side, many nursing homes use basically the value of your house in some cases, or even take loans against your house to pay for these nursing homes that are so expensive. They highlighted even like 100+ K a year. And so that can very, very quickly reduce any amount of savings that you thought your parents had or elderly folks have in your life if you're expecting their money to go farther than it might actually be able to.
Boomers are notorious for not being transparent with their kids about their financial situations.
If you have a parent over 65, you might not know how prepared or unprepared they are for these rising retirement costs.
But perhaps it will give you a better idea if we run the numbers.
Unlike his older sister, Leo didn't manage to buy a house before the market exploded. Although he wishes his parents long and healthy lives, he's come to believe that his only hope at ever being a homeowner now lies in a potential inheritance.
His parents, Michael and Suzanne, retired in their late 60s with about $200,000 in savings and a paid-off house worth about $400,000, putting them well above the boomer median in terms of retirement. What's more, Michael's pension from his years as a teacher covers $2,000 a month of daily living expenses, with the rest taken care of by Social Security benefits.
Unfortunately, a few years into retirement, Michael is diagnosed with chronic kidney disease, pushing their yearly healthcare spending to about $50,000. After several years, their savings is almost depleted, and Suzanne's arthritis has worsened to the point that she can no longer act as Michael's caregiver. The family now faces some tough choices.
They could hire a live-in caregiver for around $4,000 a month, plus room and board. But it's looking increasingly likely that they'll have to sell the house to pay for further medical costs. As difficult as it is to be apart, they decide that Suzanne will move in with her daughter's family and Michael will live at a nearby nursing home for $8,000 a month.
By the time Michael passes away 18 months later, their original net worth of $600,000 is now around $200,000. With Suzanne's yearly medical expenses of $24,000, the average for her age bracket, that should keep her solvent for several more years unless she also requires long-term care.
As we mentioned in a previous episode, dying-related costs like burials and estate attorneys can reach into the tens of thousands of dollars. So it's starting to look like by the time everything is over and done, whatever Leo ends up splitting with his sister probably won't equal a down payment on a house.
Well, that was the most depressing run the numbers we've ever done.
True, but there's nothing to be gained by sticking your head in the sand, especially with the media attention around the great wealth transfer. A lot of millennials might be foregoing savings or investments under the illusion that a big windfall is in their future.
The most important thing you can do now is to start an open dialogue with your parents about their financial situation, including what you and your siblings are willing or not willing to do for them.
So this is a great point that they're covering here. They also just went through some of those other expenses that are likely to occur. One thing that I want to call out is I do think folks should be trying to make the best out of their situation every day. I do think this is something that sometimes we can get caught up in things and we can delay starting to fix some of these problems with the hope that something is going to come by later that maybe makes our life so much easier. And so why struggle today when maybe you don't have to struggle at all? And I think this is a mistake that I see a number of folks make. It's maybe not everybody, but I feel like there's a large enough portion that I see folks who are delaying paying off their loans, maybe aggregating loans, maybe delaying buying a house or saving for retirement. There's a number of scenarios where tomorrow always seems like a better day to do these things, but every day is yesterday's tomorrow. And we can fall short of what we had hoped that we would do in hindsight. And so you don't want to end up in a scenario where you're later in life and you thought tomorrow was going to be sometime in your 30s, and now you're in your 50s and tomorrow is today, and you're so far behind that it becomes impossible for you to do it. Because again, in many scenarios, the younger you are, the more time you have for compounding. And so this actually means the lower the lift is, relatively speaking. So if you save something like $100 a month when you're in your 20s, that might be more powerful than $1,000 a month when you're in your 40s, for instance. And so this is where your expected salary is likely not going to 10x between your 20s and 40s, but the value of your money could in that time frame. And so I definitely encourage folks to try to do the best they can with their current situation. It might be difficult early on, but I find that the sooner you rip the Band-Aid on these situations and kind of getting the struggle out of the way, the better off you will be later on. And I do think this individual is bringing up a separate good point. I'm not sure if it's just for inheritance purposes, but likely you should be having conversations with your older family members on how prepared they are for retirement, what's going to happen when more serious issues occur. I know these are things that we don't like to think about, generally speaking, but it is good to be aligned at some level. You don't necessarily have to get into the nitty-gritty details on any of these things, but starting a dialogue on this will likely help you down the road when one of these things could occur.
That could mean setting aside a room in your home or helping them arrange long-term care insurance.
Everyone likes the idea of a bag of money being dropped in their laps, and every parent hopes to leave something to their kids that will make life easier.
But thanks to a combination of policy, demographics, and increasing lifespans, that's getting less and less plausible for most Americans.
Unless your family is already in the top 5%, prepare as if you'll be on your own.
And that's our 2 cents.
Thanks to our patrons for keeping 2 Cents financially healthy. Click the link in the description to become a 2 Cents patron.
watching. If you liked what you saw, please hit like or subscribe. I will see you around.